Next time you walk into a modern American grocery store, take a moment to look at the center aisles. Look at the cereal boxes, the neatly packaged snacks, the endless rows of sauces, and the pristine, uniform produce stacked under clinical fluorescent lighting. It is a cathedral of abundance. You are looking at roughly 40,000 distinct items. It feels like the pinnacle of human achievement, the absolute democratization of choice. But it's an illusion. Pick up a box of pasta. Pick up a bottle of ketchup. Pick up a seemingly independent, artisanal brand of organic crackers. I have traced these supply chains, the parent companies, and the holding companies above them. And what I found is that those 40,000 choices rapidly collapse into the portfolios of about 10 megacorporations. Every bite you take is a transaction with an invisible, highly centralized empire. Welcome back. In the first 2 chapters of this series, I laid out the systemic dismantling of private property, how you are being trained to rent your existence, and the tightening grip over global energy, restricting your physical movement. But to complete the architecture of total systemic dependence, I found there is one final, inescapable vulnerability they had to secure. It is not your bank account. It is not your car. It is your biology. True population control does not pass through the barrel of a gun. It is far too messy, far too obvious. True control passes through carbohydrates, through the absolute, centralized mastery of the calories required to keep your heart beating. And the blueprint for this ultimate monopoly didn't begin in a boardroom. It began quietly, decades ago, with a single, laboratory-modified grain of wheat. To understand the trap closing around you today, I want to take you back exactly 1 century. If you were a farmer in 1925, your most valuable asset wasn't your tractor. It wasn't even your land. It was your seed library. Farmers saved seeds from the best-performing plants of the harvest, adapting them year over year to the specific microclimate, soil, and pests of their region. Nature provided a decentralized, highly resilient, and utterly free open-source code for survival. Today, 90% of that botanical biodiversity is gone, extinct, wiped from the face of the earth. How did humanity lose the genetic inheritance of thousands of years of agriculture? We were sold a miracle. In the mid-20th century, a man named Norman Borlaug spearheaded what is universally celebrated as the Green Revolution. He developed high-yielding, disease-resistant varieties of dwarf wheat. History classes dictate that Borlaug is the man who saved 1 billion lives from starvation. And in the short term, the yields were indeed staggering. But history is written by the victors, and the victors of the Green Revolution were not the farmers. Borlaug's engineered seeds had a catch. They required massive, unprecedented inputs to survive. They needed specialized, synthetic fertilizers. They required chemical pesticides. They required industrialized irrigation. They didn't just upgrade the crops. They fundamentally altered the operating system of global agriculture. They transitioned it from a natural, self-sustaining loop to an industrial system entirely dependent on external chemical inputs. The Green Revolution wasn't just about feeding the world. It was the exact moment agriculture was permanently tethered to the chemical industry. We traded self-sufficiency for yield, and in doing so, we handed the keys to human survival over to the corporations that manufactured the chemicals. Once the chemical dependency was established, the next logical step for the invisible empire was the ultimate legal coup, the privatization of life itself. I want you to look at a single soybean, a small, pale, seemingly insignificant sphere. For 10,000 years, if you grew a soybean, you kept a fraction of the harvest to plant the next year. It was the fundamental law of agriculture. But in the 1990s, companies like Monsanto, now absorbed by the pharmaceutical giant Bayer, and Syngenta realized that selling chemicals wasn't enough. They genetically modified the soybean to withstand their proprietary herbicides. But here is the brilliant, psychopathic twist. They didn't just patent the modification. They patented the seed. Suddenly, a biological organism was legally classified as biological intellectual property. If a farmer saved those seeds to plant the following year, they were no longer engaging in agriculture. They were committing patent infringement. I have read the court transcripts. Farmers were sued, bankrupted, and destroyed. The seed monopolies fundamentally rewired our relationship with nature. Life itself was transformed into a subscription service. You don't own the seed. You merely license the right to grow it for 1 season. Connect this to what I showed you in Chapter 1 about the abolition of private property. You will own nothing, not even the genetic code of the food you grow, and you will be happy. Or, at least, you will be fed, as long as you pay the licensing fee. But controlling the software of life is useless if you don't own the hardware, the soil. Over the last decade, I have monitored a silent, aggressive consolidation of American and global farmland. The largest private owner of farmland in the United States is not a consortium of farmers. It is Bill Gates. Right behind him are massive pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and asset managers like BlackRock and Vanguard. The mainstream media frames this as an ecological initiative, a philanthropic effort to optimize agriculture for climate change. Do not be naive. Wall Street does not do philanthropy. They do risk assessment and asset control. When fiat currencies hyperinflate and digital assets evaporate, what remains? Arable land and fresh water, the basement of human survival. By quietly buying up the land, the financial elite are executing a modern land grab. They are monopolizing the physical medium required to produce calories. He who controls the land dictates who gets to farm, what they are allowed to grow, and at what price it is sold. You are watching the recreation of feudalism, dressed up in the language of sustainability. Yet, even with the seeds and the land secured, the modern food supply has a fatal, deeply suppressed vulnerability. A vulnerability that exposes the illusion of our independence. Look at a loaf of bread. You see wheat. When I look at it, I see processed natural gas. Modern agriculture does not run on sunlight and rain. It runs on fossil fuels, specifically through the Haber-Bosch process, which synthesizes ammonia for fertilizer. Without synthetic nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, our current crop yields would collapse instantly. The Earth, in its natural state, can only support about 4 billion people. The other 4 billion are alive exclusively because of synthetic fertilizers. This brings me to nitrogen diplomacy. Who controls the ingredients for these fertilizers? Russia, China, and Morocco. If the supply chains for natural gas and potash are severed through war, sanctions, or orchestrated crises, the global agricultural engine stops. The entire system is running on a highly fragile, just-in-time delivery schedule. If the fertilizer stops flowing today, half the world begins to starve in 120 days. That is not a theory. That is biological math. The food supply is essentially an extension of the petrochemical industry, completely vulnerable to geopolitical blackmail. And the architects of this system know it is fragile, which is why they are currently engineering the final, most dystopian pivot of all. You are being aggressively pushed away from traditional agriculture and toward the laboratory. Synthetic meat, genetically engineered yeast, insect-based proteins. The marketing campaigns are relentless. Eat bugs to save the planet. Switch to lab-grown meat to stop climate change. Do you really think the institutions that spend a century polluting the earth and patenting its biology suddenly care about the carbon footprint of a cow? Real meat, raised independently on open pasture, cannot be monopolized. A farmer with a cow is a sovereign entity. He possesses a decentralized calorie source. But a bioreactor churning out synthetic, cell-cultured protein? That is a patented industrial process. The push for synthetic food is not about the climate. It is about removing the last remnants of nature from the food chain. If meat is grown in a lab, it becomes an industrial product, entirely subject to patents, corporate pricing, and centralized off switches. It is the absolute realization of caloric hegemony. They want you disconnected from the soil, dependent on a sterile, centralized spigot for your daily protein. But the monopolization of that physical seed in the soil is only the hardware phase of this operation. To truly enforce the paradigm, they require a software update. They need to control not just how the food is grown, but how it is tracked, purchased, and allocated to you, the end consumer. Look at what is happening right now, disguised as environmental policy. Across the developed world, independent farmers are facing a highly coordinated campaign of regulatory asphyxiation. We are constantly told that traditional farming is a crisis, an unsustainable burden on the planet. Governments are imposing draconian nitrogen emission targets and land use restrictions, perfectly calculated to make independent, multi-generational farming economically impossible. They don't need to seize the land by military force. They simply regulate the farmer into bankruptcy, forcing a distress sale to the very asset managers and corporate conglomerates I mentioned earlier. It is a bloodless coup, the systemic, legalized eradication of the independent producer. Once the independent producer is removed and the supply chain is entirely consolidated, the final loop closes, the integration of your food supply with your digital identity. Enter the concept of personal carbon allowances and programmable currency. We are rapidly moving toward a financial system built on central bank digital currencies. This is not merely digital money, it is conditional money. Combine this with the relentless corporate push to track the carbon footprint of every individual item in your grocery cart. Do you see the convergence? In the near future, buying a steak will not just be a financial transaction. It will be a biometric and environmental audit. Your digital wallet will communicate with the supermarket's database in real time. If your personal carbon score is depleted, or if the algorithm determines you have exceeded your allotted quota of natural animal protein for the month, the transaction will simply decline. You will not be explicitly told you cannot eat. You will simply be nudged, forcefully and systemically, toward the patented, lab-grown, insect-based alternatives. The synthetic slurry produced by the exact same corporations that write the environmental regulations. Your diet will be dictated by a centralized ledger. This is how caloric hegemony is enforced without firing a single bullet. It is invisible, frictionless, and completely automated. You might think you can opt out. You might think you can just buy organic or shop at a local farmer's market to escape the trap. But the illusion of resistance has already been commodified. Over the past 2 decades, almost every successful, independent organic food brand has been quietly acquired by the same 10 megacorporations that produce the chemical-laden junk food in the center aisles. They own the poison, and they own the premium-priced cure. Even the concept of local is being redefined. Massive, automated vertical indoor farms, funded by Silicon Valley venture capital, are being built on the outskirts of major cities. They use proprietary seeds, proprietary synthetic nutrient solutions, and proprietary artificial lighting. They call it sustainable because it uses less water and zero soil. Zero soil. Think about what that actually means. It means the complete, final detachment of human sustenance from the earth. It is agriculture entirely dependent on the electrical grid, a grid they control, and software algorithms, which they own. If the power goes out, or if a cyber attack hits the facility, the crop dies in hours. It is the ultimate expression of biological fragility, packaged and sold to you as high-tech innovation. The masses are sleepwalking into a biological trap, a system where the fundamental act of nourishing your body is mediated by a cartel of tech billionaires, chemical giants, and asset managers. Every time you swipe your card for a cart full of processed, hyperpalatable, chemically dependent calories, you are funding the architecture of your own enclosure. You are trading your biological sovereignty for convenience. Allow me to connect the final dots of this systemic architecture for you. My investigation into the trilogy of systemic dependence is now complete. They have commodified your shelter, transforming you into a perpetual renter in the land of your ancestors. They have consolidated the energy grid, ensuring your physical mobility is a privilege that can be throttled or revoked at a moment's notice. And finally, they have engineered a hostile takeover of the food supply, replacing the resilient, open-source code of nature with a fragile, patented, and weaponized industrial machine. You are being placed on a caloric leash. Without a home of your own, without the unhindered ability to travel, and without the autonomy to feed yourself, you are no longer a citizen. You are a biological liability managed by an algorithm. Starvation is not a tragedy in this system. It is the ultimate reset button. It is the perfect leverage. Freedom does not begin with a ballot box. Freedom begins with a seed that does not belong to a corporation planted in soil that you own. But look around. That seed is almost extinct.